It's the Law with attorneys Roger Cates and Walter McKee. It's the Law explores the great legal issues of our times. It's the Law explains the politics and controversies behind the law. It's the Law explains the impact on real people with a live audience. It's the Law shows you how the law affects your daily life. Watch It's the Law with Roger and Walter and be in the know.
I'm Walt McKee from Lippman, Cates & McKee.
And I'm Roger Cates, and welcome to It's the Law. Join us tonight as we talk about the issue of medical marijuana in the state of Maine. We'll be right back.
You show me everything that I should know. You show me just how to walk.
Appreciation. Pass it on.
'Cause Mom, you always were the perfect
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
In 1999, Maine passed a medical marijuana law that was, at the time, Roger, pretty radical for pretty much across the United States. It allowed people to possess marijuana for medical use. It was changed in 2002, and just last month the law was changed yet again in response to a citizen initiative to expand Maine's medical marijuana law to allow for the establishment of dispensaries and also a whole host of other changes to really make medical marijuana more available in Maine to more people.
So we're going to talk about that law tonight, the whole use of medical marijuana, and also the new dispensary law with a panel of folks who really know this subject inside and out. First of all, we've got Dr. Mark Publica, who is a Portland addiction specialist at Mercy Hospital, who has some real reservations about this dispensary law. We've got Representative Ann Haskell, who is co-chair of the legislature's Criminal Justice Committee and a member of the task force implementing this law. Next, we've got District Attorney Everett Fowle, who is the chief prosecutor for Kennebec and Somerset counties. Don Kristen, who is an outspoken supporter of the use of marijuana, but who is actually opposed to this particular law and its implementation. In the back row, we have Dan Walker, representing the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative. Next, we have two folks, Elizabeth Thorman and Eric Freiberg, who are working to set up a dispensary themselves under this new law. And last but not least, Dr. John Voidovich, who practices here in Augusta, who has some experience, considerable experience in prescribing medical marijuana already under Maine's prior law. So let me first, if I could, read a quote. And this comes from John Walters, who's the director for the Office of National Drug Policy for the United States. And he says, smoking marijuana damages the brain, heart, lungs, and immune system. It impairs learning and interferes with memory, perception, and judgment. Smoking marijuana contains cancer-causing compounds and has been implicated in a high percentage of automobile crashes and workplace accidents. So if that's the case, why are we even talking about using medical marijuana, this dangerous substance, to treat conditions? Representative Haskell?
I'm glad to talk about that. About 20 years ago, my daughter, who was an adult at the time and pregnant, had a very serious cancer and a very aggressive chemotherapy treatment, which left her with severe nausea, particularly after having had a long surgery. And she was unable to keep any kind of food down, say nothing about a glass of water or a pill or something, anything to keep her strength up. And she turned to marijuana. And it was not a cure-all for her disease or her symptoms, but what it meant is she could drink a little bit of apple juice, she could have a bowl of soup, and it made all the difference in her recovery.
Everett, you're the chief prosecutor in this area. It is against the law to possess, it may be a civil infraction, but to possess marijuana, certainly against the law to sell it or distribute it. Do you have concerns about the use of medical marijuana? How do you condemn on that?
Well, if a physician wants to prescribe marijuana to a patient, and there's careful records kept and accountability, and we don't have the situation that we had in the Los Angeles area repeatedly with them just turning into wholesale drug markets, I'm not terribly concerned about that. I was very much opposed to this law because of all the other things in the law, and I did my best to sound the alarm about the specific provisions that I found to be odious and objectionable. And in my two counties where I'm most heard, the vote in Kennebec County was very close, and in Somerset County, it failed. So I think when people really knew what was in the law, they were much more sanguine than in other parts of the state where perhaps they didn't.
Sure. That obviously wasn't the case in the state of Maine. That passed by a pretty resounding majority. In fact, the 1999 law passed by a pretty significant majority as well. Majority this time 58 to 41, but by most accounts will be a real drubbing. But a pretty significant change nonetheless. Certainly a lot of what was talked about was the dispensary system, but there was a whole lot more in that bill. And I know Dan knows a lot about this from working in the task force now that's trying to implement that. Maybe Dan could talk a little bit about some of those changes that he sees on the horizon from the new law, and maybe a little bit of how they're going to try to implement those.
How's this going to work out, Dan?
Well, that's a good question. I've been serving on this task force. I drafted the original bill, and we were hoping that this task force could go forward and implement the law nearly the way it was written, at least close to the spirit of it, as close as possible. The law envisions nonprofit dispensaries set up as well as continuing the primary caregiver process that's been in place since 1999, not really changing that, upping the limits on those slightly from 3 mature plants to 6 mature plants, allowing each primary caregiver to have per patient. The dispensaries were set up to allow, the idea was to allow better access to patients, to allow patients easy access to the medicine that they need, as you heard from Representative Haskell. Right now, the task force is going through its final recommendations. Representative Haskell actually has an idea that we're now tossing around right now to separate the growing of the medical marijuana from the nonprofit dispensaries. You know, as someone who drafted it, as someone who's been working closely with the campaign and hearing a lot from patients, we want to keep it as close, the nonprofit dispensaries as close together and keep them as tight as possible without separating that. We also want to protect as much confidentiality as possible. There's been some debate on the task force to loosen up the confidentiality, especially with regards to law enforcement. I think we're coming to a good balance there, but it took a little doing to get to that balance for confidentiality.
Well, thank you. Well, you two want to get involved. You want to be one of those first nonprofit dispensaries. Is that right?
Yes.
Correct.
And what town are you from?
South Portland.
From South Portland. Why do you want to do it?
My sister 2.5 years ago or so died of an aggressive breast cancer, and that eventually took her life. And while that part of the story isn't similar to Ann's, the aggressive treatment part was. She couldn't keep down anything, water, the sight of food made her throw up, vomit. And she lived in San Francisco, which, you know, she should have been able to have immediate safe access to marijuana, and she wasn't able to do that. It's my firm belief that if she would have had access to medical marijuana, she would have survived the treatment and beaten the disease. She had an incredible will to live. But if you can't keep any food down and nourish your body, then you know, you're not going to be able to fight any kind of treatment that they give you.
Elizabeth, how are you going to do this? You're going to do it out of your home? You're going to get a storefront? And how are you going to make sure it doesn't get into the wrong hands?
Our vision is that we've been looking at different locations. We're looking at places where there's where the zoning is business or industrial business, where it's not near any schools or really not in any neighborhoods where people are living. Our vision is to have a place where people can not only come in and get their medicine, but also have services such as massage therapy, Reiki. So it's more of a holistic center where they can come in and have other treatments.
Are they going to be? Is this going to be like a social setting in which they can actually smoke marijuana there in your facility?
That's not really what we're thinking of. There would just be a place for them to receive their medication, you know, have some treatments if they choose to. We are looking into 24-hour security so that, you know, the patients feel safe and the neighborhood is more safe.
So they raise an interesting point because there are towns all around Maine now thinking about the zoning implications of this and where we might want to site them in our communities. And I know Brewer I think it's the town of Brewer that's put a moratorium for now on any dispensaries in their town.